Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Where Are You on Your Digital Transformation Journey? 6 Criteria to Measure Your Company's Readiness for Future Success. I'm Teresa Resick, the Director of Webinars here at AIIM, and AIIM is your host and producer of today's event. And with me today are Connie Moore of Digital Clarity Group and Patrick McGrath of Dell EMC. And Dell EMC is the underwriter of today's webinar, and we thank them for their support. And thank you for taking the time to join us today. Now, as we get started here, I just want to offer a few pointers for viewing today's webinar, just as you see the About AIIM slide up there on your screen. And by joining our webinars live, you can customize your own viewing experience, so feel free to open or close or resize the different windows. But across the bottom of your screen is a list of all of the widgets that are available to you. You can download a PDF at any time of the presentation, so just look to the right side of the slide area at the resource list. There's also a few other documents and links in there to help you learn more about today's topic. Feel free to ask questions throughout the hour using the Q&A feature. We will hold them until the end, where we should have about 5 or 10 minutes to answer them. But also feel free to comment and ask for technical assistance. At the end of this webinar, a brief survey will open up in your browser, and we'd appreciate it if you would take a few moments to offer your feedback and to suggest other topics for us to cover. And also the link to that survey is also one of the ones in the icons across the bottom. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to AIIM.org's Resources Webinars page in just a few days. I'd like to introduce our featured speakers today. I'm pleased to have both of these people with us. Connie Moore is the Senior Vice President of Research at Digital Clarity Group, and she has unparalleled experience working with senior executives in business and IT, technology, marketing, and government, ranging from subject matter experts to large enterprises throughout the globe. She has managed international teams of analysts focused on a wide range of technologies such as social and collaboration, content management, business analytics, business software, and business process management suites. Her research encompasses business transformation, process management, customer experience management, information management, the future of work, new business models, and organizational change management. We also have with us Patrick McGrath, and he serves as Director of Digital Transformation within Dell's EMC's Enterprise Content Division. Patrick has an IT and consulting background and champions business innovation enabled by technology, particularly with the use of enterprise content and archives. Patrick is a regular speaker at industry events, advises customers, leads webinars, and serves on AIIM's Executive Leadership Council. So right now I'm going to be turning things over to Connie Moore to begin today, and we're going to start with just a baseline definition of what we mean by digital transformation, and just let that be the starting point for today's discussion. So Connie, why don't you take it away?
Okay, and we thought we would start with a definition. There's certainly many definitions out there, and you may want to Google them. But what you have here is Digital Clarity Group's definition. So we believe that it's the strategic use of digital content, technologies, and practices to transform how institutions connect and how they engage with their customers and prospects. I think an important aspect of this definition is that it's the practices. So it's not just the information, it's not just the technologies that deal with the information, but it is how the organization strategically approaches the whole digital world. And it's through those practices that you get the transformative aspect, and then the technology is the enabler. Now, Patrick, we wanted to do this as a fireside chat. How does that square with how you've been seeing digital transformation?
So thanks, Connie, and I'm honored to be co-presenting with you. I've been a follower of your research for quite some time, and really like what Digital Clarity Group is providing. You know, when we take a look at digital transformation from where we see our customers looking at, I think you've hit the nail on the head. You know, the primary focus here is how do you provide a better ultimate experience to customers and prospects. I think when we take a look at where, for example, ECM and many of the other technologies are deployed, it's really right throughout the whole business model. From the point where you're taking a look at, the core operations and how you're actually delivering it, what the core business operations are, and maybe even how you're delivering that value in terms of partners and channels and all that sort of thing. So for us, digital transformation is absolutely centered around that customer, but also something where it's really quite pervasive through all aspects of the business model. Would you agree with that, Connie?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. I think when we take a look at, why so many customers are taking a look at sort of renewed efforts, I think one of the things that comes off at first blush when I talk to a lot of customers is, well, this stuff is not new. Is digital transformation just sort of a new name on something that's been going on for quite a while? And in many respects it has, right? We've been scanning documents from paper to digital forms for near on 20 years now. And so, I think there's a lot of transformation that's taken place, but I think one of the big things that's happened now is because technological capabilities have accelerated so much, it's really sort of bringing out these issues of where these disruptions are coming from and how quickly it is for organizations to react to those. So we see a number of areas that are sort of sources of that disruption. And this is a picture here from a MIT Sloan study, but it's really talking about, two primary sources of customer expectations perhaps and what's happening with your competition. And from their standpoint, sort of a distant third, but something that's very, very core to what's happening in the industry at the moment is, if you want to do the best things in the industry and disrupt and survive, you've really got to have the right workforce. And so there's a lot of push from employees to get the transformation going as well. Outside their report, it was interesting because the regulatory and compliance issues are actually a really big driver, especially for industries like financial services, life sciences, healthcare, even energy and engineering. So we're seeing that the changes in the law internationally and with globalization are also really pushing major disruptions that are driving sort of the need for agility and quick reach and compliance. Connie, I was really interested when we were talking about this subject earlier on. What do you think in terms of these issues about how quickly technology is advanced and the consumer push? Do you have a perspective on that?
Yeah, I think that the whole consumerization of IT is one of the major drivers that got digital transformation on the agenda of just about every C-suite around. And by that we mean that in the past, IT and businesses in general had all the control because they had all the computing power. And the poor customer was often told, well, our computers say, or our computers can't do, or whatever. And they were left holding the bag because they didn't know anything about computers. Whereas now we're all running around with smartphones that rival computers in terms of the amount of information at our fingertips. So the consumerization is important. And to me, social, mobile, and cloud kicked it off, especially mobile. That just made the world change. And what I think we're on the cusp of now is wearables, virtual reality, and drones. Drones for business use are going to change it again. And I'll just say that I got so curious about this. I recently researched wearables, virtual reality, and drones, and that information is on our website if anyone's interested in our thinking about that.
Yeah, a lot of great thought leadership on that front, Connie. We agree. I mean, this is, and we'll get to this, I think, in terms of some of the themes later on in this discussion, but, everything just seems to be moving so fast, and now we've also got a lot of discussions around things like artificial intelligence and machine learning that's looking to accelerate this whole process even further. So I think when we take a look at digital disruption and how we're going to be able to leverage that to transform businesses, this is not just a single project, right? This is something that's ultimately a new way of thinking and forcing a lot of new skills and new values across many of the organizations we're dealing with. It was interesting when we started taking a look at digital transformation in terms of maturity models. There's a whole bunch of different maturity models out there. Again, this is a diagram from MIT Sloan about how they've kind of mapped various organizations' digital maturity models and then kind of mapped it against a series of sort of performance indicators. And one of the things that we see here is that there seems to be a consistent correlation between folks that are very, very digitally literate in their business strategies in terms of, the comparative revenue, comparative profitability, and comparative valuations of those organizations. Especially when you take a look at, who are the largest companies in the world. 15 years ago, it would have been a completely different set than we're seeing today with leadership from groups like Apple and Google and Facebook, for example. So I think, there's a big issue here in terms of making sure that people kind of really treat this seriously, I think, with an imperative. To sort of talk about this a little bit more, we talk a lot about business models, and here's an example of something that's quite a commonly accepted way of looking at a business model. There's a core set of things that you're offering to your customers. On the right-hand side, there's a whole load of activities and information that you would use to take a look at customers and how you relate to them, how you reach out to them. And on the left-hand side of the model is really sort of how you're delivering upon that. What we see is, if you change one component of that business model, it really has a massive impact. So if you decide to go after a new customer segment, you really have to think about how you build relationships with those organizations or people, how you drive those channels, and how you actually deliver that kind of value. If you come in and say, hey, I've got a new offering, then everything really has to be reevaluated. And so for me, one of the key issues here is we're often very, very used to creating efficiencies inside a business function or inside a set of processes. And this creates a lot of silos that I think are really kind of getting in the way of a lot of digital transformation, and is really kind of a key challenge for organizations as they start building their strategies forward. And again, when we see sort of where most of those digital transformation efforts are going to, again, Connie, we're I think really hitting the whole issue of customer-driven initiatives, providing customer benefit, about what's the core offering and the core value that you're offering to those customers, and then clearly how you're delivering upon that value to the customers. And these are sort of three major groupings of where we see these digital transformation efforts taking hold. So I think, to take a look at our 6 criteria for readiness, the first one that comes up on the list often is this culture issue and leadership. Connie, can you provide a thought around that from your perspective?
Yes, and this diagram is a direct result of me interviewing 20 customer experience leaders, senior-most executives in enterprises in North America and Europe. I did that last year, and one of the things that became clear to me is that often the initiatives would be started by senior executives. It could be the CMO, it could be some other CXO, but the focus would normally be on having seamless experiences across the customer journey, which we'll talk about in a minute, having consistency in the channels so that you don't have to go to one particular channel in order to get one thing done and another channel to get something else done, and new ways of engaging with customers. But usually what would happen is the CEO and even board directors would hear of this and get vitally interested in it, and then it would become a corporate-wide strategy, and it would be led by the CEO, and that's where you would get into the new business models that Patrick was just taking us through, looking at internal processes from an outside perspective, focusing on human capital, focusing on how to innovate and use those innovations in your customer experiences, how to use technology to make these experiences real, and a commitment to excellence. And that's why this operational excellence is equally important to the customer experience excellence. And so we're seeing it's really driven by senior executives. And I have some data from the survey. We did 200 surveys in North America and Europe. And you see here that the leaders in determining the software is IT. So the CIO has a very significant role in leading these digital transformation initiatives because they're so technology-based. You also see new senior executives emerging, senior executives that may have titles like Chief Customer Officer or something like that. And then you'll see that marketing is less than 10% of the time. And so there's been a big myth that marketing is driving this. And in reality, marketing has so much going on inside marketing, like marketing automation and having digital channels and using analytics to analyze customers and attribution. They have a handful. And so it's either C-suite-led, a collaborative effort across a number of senior executives, or one of these initiatives, new titles, but with IT very much having a senior role in it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting observation, isn't it? Because we have, line of business executives really sort of pushing those areas of the organization in terms of business level innovation, but often it's very difficult for the incumbent leaders, if you like, to even be aware of what's possible in terms of capabilities that they could use to kind of really switch things up a little. Do you see, Connie, any trend towards sort of, so we got here, IT and the CIO largely sort of pushing the software purchases side of the discussion, but do you see any trends towards that becoming a bigger deal or more autonomy within business groups to make some of those key decisions?
I see both. I see IT becoming a bigger and bigger deal because more and more of this is so technology-led and is coming at organizations so quickly. You see new titles for CIOs. So you see CTOs, Chief Technology Officers. And those are important individuals in companies where technology is critical to the product. So it's not just technology is critical to the customers, employees, and partners and so forth, but think about cars. How much of a car is infused with technology? So the role of the Chief Technology Officer is becoming quite significant. We also see a new breed of technologists called Business Technology Officers. And I've run into this even in government agencies where the CIO and stalwarts within IT basically keep the operations going, keep the lights on. The business technology group becomes a mixture of business people and technologists who were working in a hybrid organization, a fused organization, if you will. And they support the business leaders in their transformation efforts. So I think it's kind of both.
Yeah, it's a really interesting tussle, and I've been doing a lot of reading over the last couple of months on this sort of the politics that are involved with traditional CIOs being so encumbered with operations and security, and the advent also of other titles like chief digital officers that are getting involved as well. So, Connie, let's maybe move into the next area of discussion. And I can forward the slide here.
I got it. I got it.
Great.
Yeah.
So speak to us about the transformation journey.
Okay, and it's a continuation of who is leading this and how are they doing it and what impact are they making within organizations. And this is, I know, quite unorthodox way to talk about companies. But I had just come back from safari in 5 African countries when I started this project where we did the surveys and interviews and so forth. And I kept thinking how these companies reminded me of animal behaviors. And so I ended up saying, well, this is really not that complicated. If you want to map the maturity of customer experience, digital transformation for customers, it kind of boils down to how mature is IT and how mature is the business in thinking about digital transformation. And the companies that were really lost and trying to do something but not making much progress reminded me of monkeys, because the whole time we were in Africa, monkeys would mimic whatever people did, but they had no understanding. And we actually had monkeys sitting at a table, sitting around drinking pretend tea and serving each other tea and biscuits. They had no idea what they were doing, but they had seen humans do it. Well,
that's amazing.
There are these companies that have read all there is to read, have brought in the management consultants, and they know transformation is important, and they, quote, unquote, embark on it, but they don't have a roadmap, they don't have a strategy, they don't have a vision. What they have is hope, and that isn't sufficient. And in one particular company that was a manufacturer that had just graduated to enterprise from being an SMD, the CMO and the CIO were fighting it out. Both of them wanted to lead the digital transformation, and they had so much conflict, and their organizations had conflict with each other, that the whole project fizzled. The CIO was fired. The old CMO was moved over to run IT, and that CMO brought in his best buddy. And they thought because they could get along, then that they would be able to deploy all of this technology, and voila, they would have transformation. Well, first of all, great, personal relationships are not the same thing as culture change. Secondly, the point isn't to just deploy technology. You really have to have a roadmap and a vision before you even do things putting in content management platforms. You need to know why you're doing it. So I would give them a monkey category. Now, if we move to the next, what we have are the gazelle. And I talked to gazelles, and they would leave me breathless because I really couldn't believe what I was hearing. They usually had one of these people with a special title, and they were going as fast as they possibly could to do customer engagement, customer experience, digital experience. And so they reminded me of gazelles because they were going so fast, and they were so nimble, and they were so agile. I mean that in an animal sense, not methodology. But they were vulnerable, and gazelles are vulnerable. If they can't outrun the hunter, they are eaten. And these individuals literally would be bringing in 30 and 40 new products in a year to do digital transformation. You name it, they had it. Cognitive computing, no problem. Marketing automation, no problem. Digital asset management, had it. They were bringing in everything without, once again, a vision or a roadmap but they were going as fast as they could because they felt scared of the competition. And their IT
Connie, got a question for you.
Yeah, what's that?
Yeah, got a question for you. So with your experience with gazelles, it sounds like they were also, you know, quite forward-thinking in their particular part of the organization, but were they also somewhat siloed in terms of how far their vision extended into sort of the big picture?
Yes, absolutely. And let me give you an example of a gazelle. I talked to a gazelle in Europe that was for a global brand. This global brand sells technology and office supplies and things like that. And what happened is there was almost this trigger point where all of their customers stopped going to the store and started buying on the web. And they were not set up to sell on the web. And so sales went down. No one came back to the stores. They had all this real estate they didn't need. And so they had a lot of fear. And that's why they had to go fast. And because there was so much fear, these people with the new titles were given a lot of power and did operate as silos. And IT was just, I guess, not part of the picture, doing business as usual. And I ran into many of these gazelles, and I know if I went back to talk to them, most of them would have failed, but they were very, very confident when I talked to them, and they knew they would succeed. And they even said, I said, well, how does this integrate, like, to your data? Doesn't matter. Well, what if this vendor, which has got, 20 people, fails? Doesn't matter. We'll bring a new one in. And their attitude toward risk was breathtaking to me. So they are the opposite of the elephants. And
yeah, it's almost like the thing that I keep on hearing a lot, which is, just do it and ask forgiveness later. And how sustainable a model that is. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And if you're in that kind of organization, it's difficult because often you're wiser than the leaders, and it's hard to not get out there ahead of them to the point that they won't listen. But to the extent that you can give wise counsel, they need it, to be honest. They really do. Now, the lions are king of the jungle in Africa, but the animal that really runs the show are the elephants. And that's so often in so many of our companies where IT does have a strong footprint and a strong presence. And usually when they embark on digital transformation, it can be quite powerful because they have so many resources and so much knowledge. So the initiatives can come off being very focused, high impact, really make a strong point within the organization. But they do tend to be slow, methodical, and plodding. Now, my favorite elephant organization in the world, I could spend an hour talking about them, the CIO led the transformation. When he started, this family-run company had 23 executives reporting to the CEO. The CIO was one of those 23. He, in a very careful, measured way, got the CEO to start thinking about process transformation, information transformation. This is even before digital transformation was a word. And they eventually, by following all the good guidance on process and information, and then coming into customer experience, they moved to 5 core processes and a 6th process of strategic planning. And the number of direct reports to the CEO went to 5. And then they added the customer angle, which was largely custom e-commerce, and giving their sales force mobile, giving them tablets so that they could go out and have engaging sales meetings with their business customers. They were a B2B company. And it worked. And was it slow? Yes. Was it methodical? Yes. Did it work? It worked so well. When the CIO started, the company could not get paid in time, and it could not ship products in time. And the company now has gone global in a big way in Asia, so they would have never been able to. All right, let's wrap up with lions. And the lions are fierce, they're hunters, they're actually collaborative. Lions work together, and they're very powerful. And I ran into a lot of them, and those guys were mature on the IT side and mature on the business side. And a good example is a financial services company that was on a 5-year digital transformation strategic initiative. They were in year 3 when I talked to them. They had gone to a complete new platform for their mortgage loans, for their branches. They had put in content management, analytics, mobile, social, all of that. But the most important aspect of all was data warehousing. They understood that data was going to be the basis for transforming everything inside and outside. So that is an example, and this was being driven by the board of directors. And the IT organization, they knew their role, and the business people knew their role, and it was a very collaborative effort. I've checked in with them since then, and they are really being quite successful.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it is.
Before we move off this one, I mean, it's every time I get caught in conversations about digital transformation, the same old case studies come up of, Uber has led disruption in their industry, and Airbnb in their industry, and Amazon in Amazon's industry. But there's a real question there on these companies that are born digital, and then other companies that, are born through more traditional business models. It seems like there's a huge set of pros and cons on both sides, right? The born digital guys don't have a lot of the legacy of the business model to deal with, and they've often got folks that are a little bit more digitally literate at the executive level. The other companies, I was just thinking of an insurance company that's a customer of ours that is really sort of taking a look at transformation as a way of being able to personalize insurance plans and so on, as a way to be able to differentiate their sort of customer experience. So I think it's a really interesting reflection that this is not just an issue to do with new companies or born digital companies, but companies that have been around for a while and, are really being hit with those sort of disruptive forces too. So it's I love the way that you've put the characters or personas here to the maturity model. One thing about IT-led organizations is we sure have good memories. We can still point to the dysfunctions from 20 years ago. What about the next criteria, Connie?
Oh, yeah. The next criteria, we've talked about them a lot, so let's officially introduce them. The customer. So much of this transformation, it starts and ends with the customer. And we have some definitions that Digital Clarity Group developed, and they are actually quite important. So one is there's a lot written about the customer experience, and it's the totality of the customer's interaction with the institution, whether it's online or offline, whether it's highly digital or minimally digital. And you'll hear organizations talk about customer experience technologies or CX technologies. And the technologies that AIIM is involved with are CX technologies. But those technologies don't get you to customer experience automatically. You have to do something with them to turn them into the customer experience. And that's the second definition. You need a customer experience management practice or approach or discipline or strategy. And it's a way of looking at this holistically. So you have a strategic that supports the processes, the skills, the technologies, all about giving the customer great experiences. And so
Absolutely.
I think that those definitions are quite important. And if you don't have agreement on that, then I would continue to work at it before going farther on initiatives.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when we take a look at discussions from our customers, we're primarily doing a lot of stuff around enterprise content management, business process management, customer communications, all sorts of stuff like that. But when we talk to our customers about how their customers are influencing, there's a set of themes that often kind of pop up, right? The number one thing is people need answers now. They need recommendations now, approvals now. People just don't want to wait for decisions or processing times, and they want any of those responses to be relevant so that ultimately they can drive for a resolution. From the convenience perspective, we need to be able to provide solutions here that provide that service wherever they are, not necessarily standing in line at the branch office, whenever. So this sort of implies being able to operate and provide service in the middle of the night or across global time frames, which speaks a lot to the need for automation, and however they want to communicate. So this sort of really brings up a whole load of those issues that I think you were talking about before with omni-channel and mobile. Information exchange needs to be really easy and in the way that's easiest for that customer to take a look at. And I think this is a big change that we're seeing in the industry, where historically we've organized a lot of our interactions at the convenience of the business office rather than putting the customer right in the center of it. This whole issue of engagement, right? We actually want, or customers want, conversation. So in certain cases they want to be able to just interact without having a conversation with anybody, but anytime they swap information, they need that feedback. It's a bi-directional thing. Personalization, if you've been doing business with me for 10 years, you should know what my preferences are. You should know all of the information that we've currently got on me, and that should be taken into account so that I don't have to keep on doing the same interactions with you the whole time. And lastly, the big issue around trust, is the company that I'm dealing with an ethical company? We've seen a lot of headlines recently about these kinds of issues, which kind of brings up the whole compliance issues and so on that many of the AIIM membership look at. But we also need to make sure that the information is going to be safeguarded appropriately and only shared when I consent. And often that means transparency. So this has a huge impact then on the kinds of functions and features that underlying technologies have got to be able to provide. So Connie, I wonder if you could kind of speak a little bit in the next few slides about how do companies actually achieve this from an objectives and vision standpoint?
Yes, I think that when you decide to go on a customer experience initiative, you have to look at your customer journey. But companies get kind of hung up on customer journey mapping, which is laying out all the paths that a customer would take in engaging with the company, all the touch points, whether it's a kiosk or the mobile phone or calling the customer service center and so forth. And that can become a huge swamp in and of itself, as does omnichannel. Omnichannel is the ability to move technologically from those different touch points, no matter how the customer navigates. But let me tell you, trying to tackle all of omnichannel is like saying, I'm going to redo all my business processes at once. You cannot do that.
Yes.
And I have talked to a couple of companies recently. One had wasted $1 million and didn't have anything to show for it. Another had spent a year and a half and had lost about $1.5 million and was redoing it. You have to chunk these things. Just because they're new and exciting doesn't mean they're all of a sudden easy. They're hard. They're challenging. And what we have here are the core competencies that Digital Clarity Group thinks are essential for embarking on successful projects. And without these core competencies, you would be not sufficiently ready, or your project team wouldn't be sufficiently balanced. And this is quite important because we're really looking at a very big challenge. Now, let's see. Let me try and advance that again. There, hold on. Okay. The magnitude of the problem is that, and this is how you want to think on your 5-year plan, is that there's a journey on the outside. So you see the customer learns, they buy, they get the product, they use the product, they pay for the product, and maybe they have to have it serviced. That's all on the outside. This is all part of that customer journey that we're talking about. There's a parallel group of functions on the inside that allow the customer to have that activity. So inside you have marketing, sales, distribution, you have service, finance, support, and they're all allowing that customer to have the interaction. So where do you start? Do you start with a sliver like finance and pay, or do you start with making your internal processes efficient and excellent? Or do you start with the whole journey on the outside from 1 to 6? Or do you focus just on what it's like to buy? Those are all really important questions. And one way to think about this from the big picture point of view, from the 5-year roadmap point of view, is you have to look at outside and inside. So we all know about companies that have really done a lot of work, and they have the customer experience to a high level of high customer satisfaction. But what if they haven't done anything on the inside and the processes are broken? The processes are siloed. Maybe you have a delightful experience of finding the product, learning about the product, ordering the product. It's just fantastic. And then you wait, and it comes to you and it's damaged. Your whole experience is ruined because the inside wasn't working properly. Or you can flip it around. You can have where you put all the effort on your internal processes, you come up with 5 strategic processes, but the outside's broken. And it's hard to do business with the company. Yeah, maybe they can ship you the product in a couple of days, but you're no longer happy because it was an ordeal doing business with them. So from the big picture point of view, we're talking about digital transformation that cuts across the whole organization, operationally excellent, and from the customer providing excellence. But you have to scope it. You have to have a plan. You can't do it all at once like those gazelles, or you'll sink under the weight of trying to get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another set of things that we're seeing quite a lot too, Connie, in terms of how people are taking a look at adapting business models. And this one's sort of around how work actually gets done, and we kind of call it the workforce and the work source component. So really, you know, whether you're using internal resources or external resources, we've all been using contractors and partners and starting to use tools like crowdsourcing a bit more. But, you know, there's a really interesting trend now for companies, especially the ones that are starting up, but maybe in the smaller companies that are sort of realizing they don't have to do all of the business functions to provide value to their customers. And, you know, how does a small company like a small bookstore maintain some sort of competition, if you like, with a group like Amazon? And so, you know, this is all then taking a look at what we've got to be able to provide the customer, and then how do we actually source that? So there's a whole set of discussions around digital transformation about how you get there. Do I want to use marketplaces to get these resources found? You know, I've got a tapped out workforce, and I need to be able to figure out ultimately strategically what kind of skills and capabilities do they need to have to be able to provide the most value in these new business models as well. So rather than sort of belabor all of the bullets that you're seeing on the screen, we're seeing a huge movement now towards these sort of adaptive workforces that can actually provide you know, peak time skills or unusual skills to actually get work done. And more we're seeing almost a workforce marketplace approach where companies are reinforcing, if you like, their own employees with external partners. So I actually did a lot of website development and content development and creative work and so on using crowdsourcing, which ended up delivering in about 20% of the time frame in about 10% of the overall cost that I would have using traditional channels. But, you know, you've really got to be able to think about how that whole process about getting work done is going to work with these new business models in place. The next topic that I talk about here is one that AIIM is very, very familiar with, right, which is all about information and how you make decisions about that information. I'd say that the bulk of the discussions that I've had about this particular topic over the last maybe 5 or 6 years with AIIM has still been sort of really centered around how do you provide controls around information to make sure that you're compliant with policies and you're compliant with records management rules and so on. But really what we're seeing, based on the fact that information is now absolutely at the center of intelligence for companies to be able to find new opportunities, to be able to zone in on the issues that need to be addressed in the short term, to be able to gain intelligence and maybe even automation, you know, information's at the core. So what we're starting to see a lot more over the last couple of years is less of a discussion about compliance and more of a discussion about the core value of the information as it relates to how it supports the business. It's not necessarily even just information that gets produced inside your company, because if you want to be able to do innovative things like help predict when your shipment from UPS is actually going to hit your door, you may be taking a look at local weather patterns and local traffic patterns and a whole variety of different bits of information about maybe your rental fleet or whatever that is. And those sources of information come from a whole load of different places, and you've got to have rules about, you know, how you recognize the value, what should happen when you get that new content in, and obviously compliance doesn't go away. It's a strong part of the discussion, but we're really trying to take a look at a value-based discussion of what could I do with this to affect my business model, then what do I have to do to keep the accountants and lawyers happy. The sixth criteria that we often take a look at here is the digital business technology platform. And the graphic that you see here is one that I've used from Gartner. But you know, if you take a look at the right-hand side, we've often dealt with a lot of traditional IT systems that have often been focused very much on sort of internal use. But now we're actually starting to see on the right-hand side a real push towards a whole set of new services and systems that are really customer experience oriented in terms of providing all of the automation and intuition and intelligence around making that work. At the top here, we're taking a look at this whole ecosystems platform side. You know, how do you deal with all of the different partners that you're dealing with? And it's not just the physical services that they provide, but for example, when we do ECM solutions and we're taking a look at digitization of, I take a picture, for example, for an insurance claim, and I want to be able to have some intelligence built into my system about what is actually in this photograph if it's not text. There are services that you can, subscribe to at an API level that give you the ability to actually come back with a whole set of subjects that may actually be included within that image or within that video. So smoke may show itself in 1 minute 24 of the dash cam video. So these are examples of external offerings that you rope in effectively into your technology platform. And of course, now we're also seeing, as you mentioned before, this whole issue of wearables and things, drones, where we're either talking about things where they're generating a lot of monitoring information for things like temperature or location, and that information's coming back for us to do something with. Or in many cases, we're talking about smart devices or autonomous devices like drones, driverless cars, those kinds of things. So you actually need to be able to have platform strategies that kind of encompass all of this stuff and really, really importantly include data and analytics right in the middle of that, because this is where the intelligence is really going to come from for you to work across those silos. So for all of this stuff to work, and blending in what's happening over cloud, mobile, social, and analytics, of course, you need basic standards there to make sure that you can connect these various systems. You can have them being interoperable, maybe with RESTful APIs and so on, and you've got really an integration plan about how that's going to work. To scale the stuff across geographies and so on, and to be able to get quickly running and very standardized processes, this whole issue about digitization, automation, intelligence, and adaptation that AIIM has been very, cognizant of, is still very, very important. And of course, we've got all of these other systems that rely on basic security and trust on these platforms. So there's quite a significant amount of work to sort of make all of this happen. If I take a look here at a simple kind of customer scenario of taking a look at, I want to define a new trip with Siri. I've got mobile applications and so on. If I want to figure out, how quickly I'm going to be able to get from A to B, there's a whole load of different systems and analytics that kind of come into play on that front. If I want to be able to take a look at things like, what my destination is going to be, and is my car okay with all of this, there's a whole separate set of systems that you've got to use. Obviously, there's a marketing role that could come into play that has different systems. If I have an accident, there's a whole set of additional capabilities. The point of all of this discussion is, ultimately searching for a great customer experience or outcome or a new offer requires a lot of systems and a lot of intelligence to be in place. So this is not a silver bullet discussion. This is a discussion about articulating your choices very, very strategically in terms of what services do I use, and very importantly, how do they all fit together? And obviously, all of these things create a lot of information and have a lot of content. So our traditional AIIM discussions about ECM and business process management and capture are all really sort of quite pervasive across all of these platform discussions. Connie, with all of that in mind, how would you recommend people move forward with this sort of idea?
Certainly. The thing is, I think you can see from the topics that Patrick and I have been talking about, there are a lot of technologies, and there'll be more and more that are right around the corner that are almost overwhelming. So don't confuse the technology with the fact that you need a customer experience management strategy. You need a cultural change management strategy. You need a 3 to 5 year roadmap. You need to chunk things like your business processes, omni-channel. It cannot all be done in one fell swoop. And so don't confuse those two. Work on them discreetly. Make sure that strategy is in place first. Secondly, don't let marketing lead this. You can tell the companies that have done this have not let this be CMO-led. Despite what you may read in business journals, marketing can lead CX initiatives that are relevant to marketing. This otherwise needs to be elevated up to more of a team approach.
I am so offended, Connie, as a new marketer. I am so utterly offended. But it's good advice. It's great advice.
It's true. It's really true. And so I mentioned that it's a 3 to 5 year time frame, so it's a 3 to 5 year budget. And you have to make sure you're on strong budgetary ground and got this phased in. And so your CFO and your COO become key to this as well. And the cultural change, I'm getting ready to write a report on culture and change management. So have a look in our website in a couple of months and you'll see something there. It's quite important as well.
Couldn't agree more. When I take a look at some of the recommendations from my side, I'm probably just going to hit on some of the methodologies that I've found are actually quite good to think about. And it's certainly not an exhaustive list, but one is that I'd take a look at a digital maturity assessment and plan. And these things, we've got one that's available on our website that we'll be able to link to. But whether, you're able to focus in with some of the guidance that Connie and her organization are able to provide around customer, or you use some of the other maturity models, having a way to be able to take a look at a high-level approach of what are some of the organizational and what are some of the informational and what are some of the technological capabilities that you have to build is really great in terms of actually helping to unify sort of an operational vision and a development vision within a company. The second thing that I'd really recommend is get folks within, particularly the IT organization, very familiar with business models, because it's very difficult sometimes when you're caught in a silo to figure out where you fit. We often see that not just with IT folks, but folks that are in records management, which is a large part of the AIIM group as well. Customer journey mapping, I think I completely agree with you, Connie. I think it's a good tool. It's not the only tool that you should use, but I think as you start trying to figure out how do I become empathetic, if you like, with the customer's journey through our organizations and all of the touch points and whether they're feeling anxious or whatever, how do you actually get a roadmap to start improving their experience and making it easy for them to work with you as a company? A benefit dependency network, there's a really good article in Harvard Business Review about sort of a way to be able to take a look at 4 business drivers on the right-hand side and figure out, how do you actually break those things down to get to a point where you can define specific initiatives to work on, and then figure out where the role of technology fits in with that. And then, of course, maybe some traditional architecture where you're looking at information architectures, technology architectures, and process and operations. But one of the things that I'd say there is, this is a really fast-moving area, and so you've got to be able to try things out and figure if they work or not, because if we get into these cycles of 18-month initiatives, you're never going to be able to get anything done in a way that you can actually, zone in on the stuff that works and figure out, how to connect these different parts of your organization. So the methodology side of Agile has many, many benefits in this area. And then the other one is, if you're an organization that doesn't have a lot of these capabilities built in, get help. Get help from Digital Clarity Group, who've got some great thought leadership. There's a lot of excellent consultants out there, but I think none of those consultants are going to help you to actually articulate your vision in terms of the company that you want to be and how you want to be able to interact with your customers. So on that, I'll pass that back to Teresa.
Thank you. We've been listening to Patrick McGrath of Dell EMC and Connie Moore of Digital Clarity Group. And in the interest of time, I'm just going, as I ask, there was one fantastic question that came in here, and it's going to be the only question we're going to get to. So I'm going to put the speaker's contact information up while we get to this question. Connie, let me start with you, but Patrick, please join in. What are some practical ways that we can increase our executives' knowledge about what's possible with new technologies? How to get that C-suite excited about all of this?
So what I would say is it comes from hearing stories that they can relate to about what other companies have done. Rather than trying to have a technology sale, have a this insurance company did this manufacturer did that. And you can do it either by having them go somewhere, so very executive-oriented conferences or executive councils that their industry association may have or other groups may have. That's one way. Another way is to bring internal speakers in and tell those internal speakers, like myself, like Patrick, and so forth, to focus on other companies' stories, the technologies they use, the business benefits they got, and how they were able to make it work. Because people, I think senior executives are quite skeptical of a pure technology story, and that's why I say this approach.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Connie. So there's a point at which you've got to be able to hear those stories, and for me, one of the things that I've seen as a trend, which is really having an impact, is sort of a new partnering model between IT and the business lines as well. And I'm seeing this kind of happen in two ways. The first one is, I think we're actually on a decentralization swing a bit again with IT, particularly when you take a look at some of the discussions around, innovation centers and how, for example, analytics and machine learning is starting to bleed its way into different business units where you really need that business knowledge to figure out quick ways to prove your point, right? So if you're having a pure technology discussion, it's always what ifs, what ifs, what ifs. Executives actually need to see results that prove out the what ifs as well. So if you've got a way to be able to partner with those groups to be able to take a look at leveraging Agile, where you've actually got blended teams that are focused on providing quick results, this is a great way to be able to kind of get those discussions up as well. So I think there's the whole discussion of digital literacy and business literacy for the IT folks is, I think, could be a whole discussion for an hour or so itself. So that's a great question.
Well, just as we're getting ready to end this webinar here, we just wanted to ask you, the audience members, step up to your keyboard and just jot into the text box that's on your screen right now, just what's the most helpful thing you've learned today. And just be interested to hear which of all of the many things that have been shared resonated so well with you. And while you're doing that, I just want to mention to don't forget to download the resources that's on the right side of your slide area as well. There's a copy of the slides there where it says download today's presentation. There's some other really great links there for some, there's an assessment, an ebook that Dell EMC has on their site. There's a link to some great information on Digital Clarity Group's website about customer experience management, and that also will give you the link to their site to come back and visit, as Connie mentioned, for when her next research paper comes out. And then I just also want to remind you that a brief survey is going to open up on your desktop when the webinar ends, so I'd greatly appreciate your feedback there just to let us know how we did today and suggest other topics for us to cover. Very much want to thank our underwriter, Dell EMC. Without the support from our solution providers, we wouldn't be able to provide you with these free educational programs like our webinars. So thank you, Dell EMC, for all of your contributions. That is everything that we have to cover today. As if everything we talked about isn't enough, there was so much great information. Thank you all very much for your time today. For AIM, this is Teresa Resick, and we will see you next time. And have a great afternoon.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.